welcome to my MCU ranking. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been around longer than most of my nieces and nephews. So that's a really long time, and it feels like I've aged quite a bit since I first saw the first Iron Man movie. So I decided to rework my ranking. I had a written blog post ranking a couple of years ago. I think the last one was in 2019 after Spiderman Far From Home came out. So I decided to rework my ranking and to rewatch some of the movies or just go through them, scan through them, not actually watch all of them because some of them aren't really worth watching again. And I had to rework my ranking because I realized that the movie I had at number one isn't actually my favorite MCU movie. So this is based on my opinion of the MCU, but I think a lot of people might agree with me, especially with my number one pick. So let's get started. So I'm gonna start with my least favorite movie, The Incredible Hulk. It makes its way up to 28th place. Why? Well, it's not really a memorable movie, and since the Hulk got recast, it doesn't really fit so much into the MCU right now, especially after all the movies that came out after it and Iron Man, the Iron Man series. So it's number 28 because it's probably one of the least memorable ones. At number 27, I have another movie that most people probably can't even remember. I know a lot of people didn't even watch it. It's Thor the Dark World. Now, I personally loved the movie when I went to see it the first time at the cinema. It was one of my favorite Marvel movies back then. But the more I rewatched it, the more I realized it's not that good. So anyway, Loki was once again the standout character in the film, but the rest is pretty forgettable, especially the villain. I know you may know his name. I know his name, but I'm not gonna say it because it's not even worth mentioning. Anyway, on to number 26. At number 26, we have a fairly new MCU movie, Eternals. The movie was visually great, but the story just didn't live up to the hype. Maybe it's because it took so long to come out or what, but it just felt a little overcrowded. There wasn't a build up to all the characters, and there wasn't a lot of character development, so you didn't really relate to most of the characters, maybe one or two of them. But other than that, the movie was okayish. It's probably worth a rewatch, but yeah, I'm not gonna rewatch it soon. Probably when I do an MCU marathon in the future. At number 25, I have Iron Man 2. The movie has one of the best suit up scenes of any Iron Man movies, but it's just not that good. It doesn't live up to the first Iron Man movie. And I don't want to say too much about it, but yeah, I still like it, but there are a lot of better movies in the MCU. So let's check out number 24. At number 24, I have Thor, the debut of the God of Thunder. It was a pretty good movie when it came out, but it doesn't live up to the rest of the MCU, especially after Thor Ragnarok came out, which is hands down one of my favorite MCU movies. So let's check out number 23. At 23, I have Captain Marvel. Well, the movie was probably what most of us expected. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. I mean, it gave us some great scenes and it brought back some 90s nostalgia, especially for us who grew up in the 90s or were born in the 90s. So, yeah, the nostalgia, big thumbs up. But the rest of the movie, I guess we'll just have to see what Marvel do with the Marvels next year. Now, this might seem a little controversial, but I have Iron Man 3 at number 22. The movie isn't bad, but it's also not that good. I know people have different opinions on it. Some might think it's one of the best Iron Man movies, others might say it's the weakest Iron Man movie. But for me, it falls somewhere in the middle. I like the Robert Downey Jr. scenes as Tony Stark, but let's be honest, there wasn't a lot of Iron Man, and also the big twist with the Mandarin was just a stupid choice. Luckily, they fixed it with Shang-Chi, so yeah, we'll get to that later on. At number 21, I have the first film from Phase 4 of the MCU, Black Widow. It introduced us to some very cool characters like Yelena, and we also got to see the Red Guardian. But other than that, it messed up Taskmaster. One of the characters I was mostly looking forward to, but yeah, maybe they'll fix it in the future as they did with the Mandarin, so we'll see. But right now, Black Widow remains where it is on my rankings. At number 20, I have Captain America, the first Avenger. Captain America's debut was pretty decent, but the Winter Soldier in Civil War showed us what a really cool Captain America movie can feel like. So, well, the first Avenger was good enough for a debut of any Marvel character. I don't think it belongs higher up on my list. At number 19, I have Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man already debuted, and the Wasp debuted in this movie. It was a pretty funny movie, as you expect from any Paul Rudd movie. The movie was a great success because of the comedy and his charm. The rest of the cast were also great, and I look forward to what the Ant-Man series will do next. And number 18, we have Avengers Age of Ultron, the one that we thought might be one of the best MCU movies. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to the hype. It was still a good movie as it introduced us to the strongest Avenger, and that's not debatable anymore. And it brought an end to all of the Shield and Hydra storylines. The movie was pretty decent and it had a pretty okay third act, and it also brought Vision into the fold. Yeah, I think it still holds up, but it's definitely not the best Avengers movie. And at number 17, we have Ant-Man's introduction. Marvel's smallest hero finally made his way onto the biggest screen possible, and it was a fun ride. I'm glad they cast Paul Rudd in the lead role, as he totally fit the role, and he gave us a funnier Marvel movie than usual. Marvel always focuses on humor, but Ant-Man really stands out, kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor Ragnarok. We have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 at number 16. The second movie in the franchise wasn't as good as the first one, but it was still pretty funny, and you got to see a whole planet going around sleeping with women from other planets. But that's not the point. At the end, it wasn't as good or as great as the first one, but it was still pretty decent. And that's why it's somewhere in the middle of my list. On to the next one. At number 15, we have Doctor Strange. When the movie came out, it was one of my favorite Marvel movies, especially because of the visuals. But I ended up realizing that they used a generic Marvel villain again, and that hurt the story a little bit. Other than that, the movie was still pretty great, even if it's just a story of Tony Stark if he was a doctor who got into an accident and learned the mystic arts. But yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch, thank you for bringing Doctor Strange to life. And while we're on the topic of Doctor Strange, I have at number 14 Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I was really hoping this movie would be higher up on my list, but I guess it just didn't live up to all the other movies in the MCU. It was still a great film. I appreciate the visuals, the story, all the great cameos, but they could have done more. They could have brought in a little more madness and a little more multiverse. Hopefully, we'll get to see that in the third Doctor Strange film. Just before you get mad at me for putting this movie at number 13, remember number 13 is my favorite number. So, my 13th favorite Marvel movie is Iron Man. It's definitely still one of the best MCU movies. It's the movie that started it all, and it's the movie that introduced us to Tony Stark, one of the best Marvel characters in the MCU. I know a lot of people who read the comics aren't really Iron Man fans, but I still think Marvel did a great job tying it all together through Iron Man. I wish the movie was a little higher up on my list, but you'll just have to wait and see what comes next. At number 12, we have Spiderman Homecoming. This movie is probably high on my list because Spider-Man is my favorite Marvel hero, as you can see on my shirt. But apart from that, I think it was a great introduction to the MCU's Peter Parker, and it gave us a great villain. The Vulture was really a standout villain in the MCU, and it proved that Marvel can do more than their generic villains. Spider-Man will remain on number 12 for now. At number 11, I have one of my favorite and one of the funniest MCU movies, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. This was one of the movies I just had to see in the cinema when it came out. Now, back then, we didn't have a cinema where I lived, so I had to travel far to see it, but it was totally worth it. And I love it. I still love it to this day, and it's one of the movies I rewatch over and over again. So, on to number 10. Okay, we're finally at the top 10 of my MCU rankings. And in the 10th place, we have Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I remember when this movie came out, I called it one of the best Spider-Man movies so far, and I still think that's true. Spider-Man Far From Home gave us a complex villain. It took Spider-Man away from his comfort zone, away from the people he relied on, and put him in a situation where he had to figure out stuff on his own. Even though he had Tony Stark's technology and whatnot, he was still just a kid trying to fit in with his friends and find his place in the world. So I think, yeah, story-wise, it's one of the best Marvel movies. And the visuals, amazing, especially with the mysterious scenes. So yeah, that's why it's my 10th favorite Marvel movie. At number 9, I have Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, I grew up on martial arts movies. I watched a lot of Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Jet Li films when I was younger. So I really appreciated when Marvel went this route, when they finally decided to make a Shang-Chi movie. Now, Shang-Chi isn't one of the biggest characters in the comics, but now it's one of the biggest and most awesome characters in the MCU. I look forward to seeing what's coming next for Shang-Chi and how they will incorporate the Ten Rings in future MCU movies. At number 8, I have the movie that broke so many records, Black Panther. It's definitely a Marvel movie to be proud of, especially for us as Africans, as it represented us and our culture. I remember the one scene where they were fighting in there with people who were dressed kind of like the Ovahimba tribe from Namibia. So yeah, shout out to that scene and to the costume department for giving a shout out to us. Anyway, Black Panther was definitely one of the best Marvel movies, and it gave us a compelling villain. And I hope that Marvel can continue the story they started with the second Black Panther movie coming out later this year. At number 7, I have the original Avengers film, the first one, the one that brought it all together. So yeah, this movie used to be my favorite, but as more movies came out, it moved up on the list. But anyway, I still think it's one of the best cinematic masterpieces of the past few decades. And it's the one that brought so many people together in the real world. Because now there are so many Marvel fans, and people just can't wait to see what's next in the MCU. So while the Avengers might have united us, my sixth favorite film divided us. Captain America Civil War makes its place to number 6. Still one of the best MCU movies, especially that airport fight scene. And it gave us Black Panther and Spider-Man. I don't want to say too much about this movie because everybody knows what happens in it and everybody knows what a great villain Baron Zemo turned out to be. So I hope we get to see more of him in the future. And now the top 5 MCU movies. You guys can already guess which movies are in my top 5. I hope you can also guess what order they will be in. Let's start. Number 5, Avengers Endgame. The movie that brought all the Avengers together. Infinity War saw the Avengers go up against Thanos, but they were all divided. Endgame saw all the heroes coming back in the fold and taking on Thanos, the Black Order, and his army. So while it might have been the biggest Marvel movie so far, I don't think it's the best Marvel movie. I really appreciate all the scenes, especially the third act, with all the action going on, with all the nods to future and past MCU movies. I just can't wait to see what the next Avengers movie might be like. At number 4 is the funniest, in my opinion, Thor Ragnarok. Thor used to be this boring character, and Taika Waititi came in and turned it around. He gave us one of the best Thor movies so far. Maybe Love and Thunder might be better, I don't know yet. I think Thor Ragnarok is the movie that brought new life to the Thor character, and he easily became one of my favorite Avengers just because of this movie. At number 3, we go into the multiverse with Spider-Man No Way Home, the movie that was so highly hyped and it actually lived up to the hype. Marvel brought in all the old Spider-Man into the fold and some of his villains, and that was just a genius decision. Also, the focus on the multiverse gave us an idea of where the MCU might head next. Maybe we'll also get to see other Spider-Man in the future, or maybe we'll get to see our characters interact more with other multiversal characters. We saw the same in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but there's still so much more stories to tell. And because, well, I told you this before, Spider-Man is one of my favorite Marvel characters and hands down my favorite superhero of all time. So I can't wait to see where they take the character next. Hopefully, we'll get to see the MCU version of Venom. At number 2, I have Avengers Infinity War, the best Avengers movie ever. I'm not gonna say much about it. It's definitely one of the best MCU movies ever made. And it's the best Avengers movie, period. Avengers Infinity War, number 2. And finally, the best Marvel movie, in my opinion, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. It's one of the most grounded stories in the MCU, and it gave us so much story, character development, action, and just amazing scenes. Things that will stay with you forever. So I definitely think Marvel made the perfect movie with Captain America, the Winter Soldier. It is the pinnacle of superhero movies, and it's a movie that set the stage for future MCU movies. I hope we get to see a movie in the vein of the Winter Soldier again sometime in the future. But for now, let's just all enjoy the MCU and let me know what you think of my ranking. I also have a full written ranking on my blog. The link will be somewhere in my description. You can also check out my TikTok where I post more videos. You can check out all of my other movie reviews or articles on my blog. So yeah, please subscribe, like this video, and share with your friends.